if we value gold at 20,000 at some point to market, or whether we try to force that. I think we'll let it run to 20,000 at least in our lifetimes, in my lifetime easily, and that will take a hell of a lot of pressure off the yield curve, but it will also slowly devalue the dollar even further, which is really what Trump and Besant want, to win the trade war. I think it was the U.S. Embassy in London, the CIA making phone calls, creating a clearing and settlement system between Hong Kong and Shanghai, where gold will be priced on physical properties, not paper claims. Again, that doesn't mean gold goes to 8,000, I'll pretend to buy, you pretend to sell, we'll just extend the contract. No longer wanted a paper claim backed gold interest or silver interest. The dollar is not going to disappear and America's not going to be in ruin. It's just going to be repriced. There's going to be more austerity, more pain, more inflation, and more deflation, by the way. But yeah, now gold, which was the enemy, is tragically the last place we can go to get QE without QE. It's gold QE. Revalue the gold, pay down some of the young end of the yield curve, reestablish our M0 money supply. All of that is dollar debasing policies that benefit Wall Street and DC.
Talking about the central banks for a bit longer, of course, we've heard that gold has now overtaken the US dollar as a holding for them. How much more room is there to go to the upside as a gold holding for central banks, as well as actually private individuals? How much is gold still under-owned today?
Again, this is a very important question. You know, most of the central banks that are getting the memo are Eastern central banks. I mean, the biggest export out of the U.S. earlier this year was gold because of the outflows out of the COMEX and out of the LBMA market in London and in the COMEX in New York, the vaults there. You have to ask, why are all these counterparties who are very happy churning and burning and playing this game of I'll pretend to buy, you pretend to sell, we'll just extend the contract. We know we got 10 claims for the same bar of gold, so let's just keep extending and pretending. What happened in 24, 25, and certainly into 26 is counterparties no longer wanted a paper claim backed gold interest or silver interest. They wanted the real metal. And that's why these exchanges, the Western exchanges that set the price, saw this exodus of gold and silver out of their warehouses, primarily to sovereign wealth funds and central banks elsewhere. And that raises a number of implications. That the COMEX is no longer the price fixer that it used to be for 50 years. It's losing its ability to price fix because it doesn't have the metals to lever to short gold and silver. Its only tricks left were to raise margins, which they did in early 2026, and squeeze, you know, got the banks out of a silver squeeze, and basically it was a bank bailout, but they pushed the price of silver down unnaturally overnight.
If Western vaults keep losing physical metal, the paper pricing system could face a credibility crisis. Matthew Piepenburg notes that central banks and major players increasingly want bullion instead of claims, exposing distrust in leverage promises. The overlooked issue is inventory. Without enough metal, futures markets can influence price through financial mechanisms rather than supply. For investors, that makes physical ownership more important than prices. Next, Matthew Piepenburg exposes what shrinking inventories reveal about positioning.
But what that means, the implications are that was also because central banks and big players and the whales want the physical metal now. They don't want paper claims. They don't want COMEX futures contracts. They don't want the old system. They want the real metal because they don't trust the old system and they don't trust the old currencies, including the US dollar and US Treasury. Again, objectively, the evidence is overwhelming. What's also happening at the same time, as the COMEX is running out of physical metals, physical gold and silver, is that you have in the East, not just the BRICS and their BRICS-backed trade settlement, you know, resolve. They're not a BRICS-backed, gold-backed BRICS currency, but they're using gold to net settle trades. We're seeing gold being used to even net settle oil trades outside of the petrodollar. We've been seeing this for years, since 2022. But in addition to all that, where gold is a more primary role, we're also seeing that Shanghai and Hong Kong have been waiting for this. They're going to create a clearing and settlement. They started this summer, and it's only going to get more and more momentum. They're creating a clearing and settlement system that is based on physical gold, not paper claims to gold. When we went and played that game with the COMEX in the 70s, I think it was like a Tom Clancy novel. You had, I think it was the U.S. Embassy in London, the CIA making phone calls. We're going to create this exchange. We're going to put a boot to the neck of gold and silver. That's going to make the dollar look respectable. The Chinese got that memo back in the 70s. They saw what we were doing. They saw what we were doing with QE in 2009, 10, 11. By 2014, they started dumping our treasuries. And they knew that there was only so long that we could play this game.
The bigger threat to the dollar may not be a rival currency, but settlement infrastructure that makes gold more useful. According to Matthew Piepenburg, Eastern markets are building systems around physical gold, while Western finance remains dependent on paper claims and dollar settlement. That creates a shift in price discovery as demand migrates east. Investors should watch settlement architecture, not just prices. Next, Matthew Piepenburg unravels why Shanghai and Hong Kong could challenge Western pricing.
That the dollar would eventually get itself over its skis in debt, that it wouldn't be our currency, your problem, it would be our problem as a whole. And they knew that eventually, after going off the gold standard in 71, gold would rear its honest head again at some point as more trusted. That's just long-term thinking. The Chinese play a lot farther ahead than the West. And so what they're doing now is they're creating a clearing and settlement system between Hong Kong and Shanghai, where gold will be priced on physical properties, not paper claims. Again, that doesn't mean gold goes to 8,000 July 24th. It just means that, as usual, and I'm not a shill for China, you have to respect your adversary. You have to. It's the art of war. Respect your adversary. They've watched us shoot ourselves in the foot year after year, trillion after trillion, U.S. Treasury after U.S. Treasury, and they're seeing the world not going to a gold-backed yuan or ruble or BRICS currency. They're seeing the world going to gold-backed collateral. And they're stacking their gold and they're pricing gold based on physical, not paper claims, which is an insult to supply and demand. And so that's happening as we speak, and that just proves the new direction is still going to be fairer price discovery in gold, set more in the East, as, by the way, the head of the Shanghai Exchange told the West in 2014 when no one took China seriously. He said to a bunch of Western bankers, soon China will be setting the gold price. That was unthinkable 14 years ago or 12 years ago, but it's happening. And you can't have a 200-day moving average in gold and silver in the East that's significantly fairer priced than the paper market in the West. And again, as we're arguing about tariffs in Canada, or what drone swarms are destroying American initiatives in Iran, or whether this is a good or bad war, whether it's an Israeli-led war, whether it's an oil-led war, all this debate, our currency system is shifting right underneath our feet, and it's going, and gold and the currency and the net settlement is moving from west to east.
The dollar can survive while the system that once made it dominant quietly loses ground. What Matthew Piepenburg is highlighting is that China does not need a gold-backed currency to challenge Western monetary power. Physical settlement itself can reshape where prices are discovered. The investor risk is being distracted by geopolitical headlines, while monetary infrastructure changes underneath them. Next, Matthew Piepenburg reveals why the battle over gold pricing matters more than another currency headline.
And again, the dollar is not going to disappear and America's not going to be in ruin. It's just going to be repriced. There's going to be more austerity, more pain, more inflation, and more deflation, by the way, based on so many factors. But the bottom line is the dollar many of us were born with and thought was sacred and immortal, and the S&P that we thought could never go down, that a dip couldn't be recovered. All these things are changing. It doesn't mean the end, it just means radical change. You've got to be prepared for change. I think it's hard to see change when you're living in it, but we are seeing a sea change in the global monetary system, which was led by the US dollar post-1944 Bretton Woods, which was insulted by Nixon in 1971, which bought us about 5 decades of time until we got ourselves in debt like drunken sailors. And even that unbacked, nothing-backed dollar is not what it was in 1971. It's lost 99% versus a milligram of gold. So now the world wants a better collateral, a better asset than an IOU from Uncle Sam. And this is why central banks are panicking, and this is why we're seeing the stacking. And this is why I think Besant and Warsh have no choice but to continue to debase until their last resort is their golden piggy bank of 8,131 tons of supposedly audited or unaudited gold in Fort Knox in New York, valued at 1973, $42.22 or 21-cent valuation per ounce. At some point, they're going to let that gold price run to market, or they'll reprice it themselves. That's a debate. But that's our last piggy bank option. Ironically, gold, which was the enemy of the dollar, as Volcker said decades ago, is now our last hope. And that full circle move from getting off the dollar in 71 to looking to getting off the gold-backed dollar in 71 to now looking to gold and our reserves to monetize our balance sheet to save us from our debt crisis is the height of irony.
A currency crisis does not require the dollar to collapse. A sustained loss of purchasing power can do the damage quietly. Matthew Piepenburg's argument suggests that gold is becoming strategic collateral precisely because confidence in sovereign liabilities is weakening. The uncomfortable contradiction is that governments may eventually depend on the asset they spent decades treating as obsolete. For savers, that changes what safe really means. Next, Matthew Piepenburg exposes why gold could become the solution to the debt problem it once symbolized.
It's the full circle. But the irony is, the bigger irony is 250 years ago, our founding fathers warned us in the very first article of our Constitution, don't get off the sound money. Our dollar is based on silver and metal and gold. It talked about this, it warned us of this, and here we are, right where they promised us we'd be, in a mess. And so it really is fascinating. But yeah, now gold, which was the enemy, is tragically the last place we can go to get QE without QE. It's gold QE. Revalue the gold, pay down some of the young end of the yield curve, reestablish our M0 money supply, etc. It gets wonky, but if we value gold at 20,000 at some point to market, or whether we try to force that, I think we'll let it run to 20,000 at least in our lifetimes, in my lifetime easily, and that will take a hell of a lot of pressure off the yield curve. But it will also slowly devalue the dollar even further, which is really what Trump and Bessent want, to win the trade war. They need a cheaper, weaker dollar. They just don't want to say it out loud. And of course, that will be great for U.S. trade. It'll be great for the trade wars. It'll be great for demonetizing or de-deficiting our debt. But it will be very, very hard on Main Street middle-class Americans who still think their dollar is what measures their wealth. That dollar is melting, and it will continue to melt as we revalue gold and as we monetize our treasury market with more printed dollars from the short end of the yield curve or from whatever tricks we have at the Fed. It's just debasement. It's just debasement. The average man on the street isn't supposed to know what non-compliance with Basel III means for QE or non-QE QE, what supplementary leverage ratios are, what issuing from the short end of the yield curve is just backdoor QE, or whether, the bailout of the Japanese carry trade was just a form of QE, repurchase agreements, or whether the reverse repo markets is just more QE.
The strongest monetary escape hatch may also be the clearest admission that the existing system is broken. This is where Matthew Piepenburg's thesis shifts. Revaluing gold could provide liquidity without openly labeling the move quantitative easing. But the hidden cost is purchasing power erosion for households holding cash and bonds. Investors should distinguish nominal relief from real wealth preservation. Next, Matthew Piepenburg unravels how gold QE could quietly transfer losses onto savers.
Nobody's supposed to understand that complex plumbing, and all I'm saying to you is all of that is dollar debasing policies that benefit Wall Street and DC and not Main Street at all.
I would love to talk about the mechanics of letting gold run to $20,000. How does that by itself solve the problem if we then don't revalue gold institutionally?
I think to revalue, we can get into that. That's one option, is just to say, like Nixon got on the news in August of 1971 and just said, we're off the gold standard, folks. Wow, that just happened, okay? Technically you could have someone step out in front of the Rose Garden and say, hey, guess what? The Fed and the Treasury have just used these, slush fund we had since 1933. We're going to revalue gold as a national security measure to 20,000. Boom. Okay. Technically, that could happen. I can talk about how that could happen. I don't think it will, because that would debase the dollar by 80% overnight. I think the better play, and I got to give full credit to Lou Groman. I've been writing about this for 2 years, but he led the way on making this more clear, of just letting gold run. He calls it the Hamiltonian direction, and how we could revalue gold to get America out of this corner temporarily. Again, step back, just so many may not know, America does have a hidden piggy bank. We have about 261 million ounces, supposedly, again, of gold, priced at $42.21 an ounce. That's, again, the 1973 price. So that's about 8,131 tons, according to the World Gold Council. Many listeners will say, yeah, Matt, but we haven't had that audited. That's exactly right. I don't know. I'm assuming that's possible. We could have more, we could have a lot less. And even if we did have those 260 million ounces, as many will know, a lot of that may be hypothecated and may be in a vault somewhere, but it's not really ours. So
America's gold reserve looks enormous until you compare its official valuation with today's debt burden. Matthew Piepenburg notes that roughly 261 million ounces, valued around $421 each, would provide little fiscal relief, making a higher valuation strategically significant. Yet the deeper issue is credibility. If reserves are unverified or encumbered, the headline tonnage may overstate usable backing. Next, Matthew Piepenburg exposes the accounting gap that could make America's golden piggy bank far smaller than advertised.
So we got to start with the premise, though. Let's just, for simple math, say we have 260 million ounces of gold at $42 an ounce. That is valued at $11 billion. That's a hiccup. That will do nothing to help get us out of debt or cover our yield curve or give us some breathing room or give us a weaker dollar for trade purposes. Even $4,000 gold, if it was marked to market today, would give us just over $1 trillion, which we could direct deposit into the Treasury General account, which is legal under the Fed's financial accounting manual. We could do that. But even if we marked it to market today, it's certainly better than at $42 an ounce. But at 4,000 an ounce, that helps a little, but it certainly would help a lot more if we marked to market gold at 17,000 or 20,000. That gives us trillions, $5-6 trillion that we could use to very much help our yield curve in the long end and help kind of monetize our M0 money supply. So the mechanics of that would be, to me, very simple. It's not about an overnight, we're going to just reset the gold price. What the mechanics involve is not some new policy to push gold higher. It's just get out of gold's way. Because you cannot underestimate how for decades we had zero free price discovery from Chicago to London to New York in that triangle. Zero. There were hundreds of billions of shorts every morning to keep gold and silver artificially repriced. Because at that time, for the last 50 years, gold was the anti-hero to the great American dollar. If gold rose too high, that was a middle finger to the greenback, the nothing-backed, all-powerful US dollar. So it was, as Volcker said, the enemy. It's our enemy. Again, today, fast forward many decades later, well, it's not the enemy. And this is what I mean.
A $421 gold valuation barely registers against a multi-trillion-dollar federal balance sheet. But $20,000 changes the arithmetic dramatically. According to Matthew Piepenburg, the crucial mechanism is not forcing gold higher, but allowing price discovery to operate without the suppression he argues dominated Western markets. That distinction matters because investors could see repricing before any official policy announcement. Next, Matthew Piepenburg reveals why simply removing resistance to gold could become a form of monetary policy.
If you let it run under the Fed's May 2025 manual that came out with the Genius Act 2, the Fed can add gold certificates to its balance sheet, which can then be deposited in the TGA. And if you let gold run, it won't be overnight like some announcement on Nixon. You go 5,000, 6,000, 8,000, 12,000, 14,000. You mark your certificates to market and you slowly, it's like QE without having to print money out of thin air. You're just getting liquidity by revaluing your gold certificates. And so it's golden QE is what I'm saying. And again, I think Groman's right. That achieves the Hamiltonian idea of a weaker dollar slowly, and the other Hamilton idea of having tariffs where other people pay for your growth. I don't think that's going to work for a number of reasons. It's a longer conversation. But I do think gold going from America's enemy to now America's last option is pretty ironic. I'm not saying it's certain to happen. I'm fairly confident that it will. We're not going to keep gold at $40.21 forever. There's no logical reason to do that. The other, I think, less likely option, I'll just say it, is to price set it. Under the Genius Act, there is no definition of what is a Fed reserve asset. It's definitely not a monetary metal. But the Fed does have guidance on FX reserves under what's called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Again, very wonky. It doesn't matter whether people remember it. It's basically a slush fund that FDR created from confiscating gold in 1933. And when he did that, He stole your gold legally at $20 an ounce, waited 9 months, revalued it to $35 an ounce, and ipso facto had some serious wealth, and the dollar lost 69% against gold, and that would help pay down debt in the 1930s. We could technically do the same thing under the idea of using this exchange stabilization fund, declaring a national emergency, and then saying we're now going to value gold on our books at this price. Fill in the blanks.
Gold does not need to be physically printed to create new financial capacity. Changing its accounting value can alter the balance sheet. What Matthew Piepenburg is highlighting is the possibility of gradual repricing functioning like indirect monetary expansion, especially if gold certificates rise alongside market prices. That could weaken the dollar without a dramatic policy announcement. Investors should watch accounting rules as closely as central bank speeches. Next, Matthew Piepenburg exposes the precedent hiding behind this modern gold strategy.
17, 20,000. It's very unlikely because, again, that would absolutely crush the dollar immediately as in terms of its purchasing power too fast. I think it's easier to let it run and slow frog boil into debasement. And even Kissinger also noted in the 70s, because they were worried in the 70s that Europe collectively had more gold than the US, and if Europe revalued its gold to market overnight and used it to pay down debt, that would be a disadvantage to the US. And he worried because what Kissinger was basically hinting without saying it is, if we revalue gold ourselves unilaterally, then he who has the most gold wins. And what I think all of us in the gold space believe is that China has a lot more gold than the World Gold Council can audit. And more importantly, it probably has a lot more gold than the US. Again, that's my opinion. That's maybe sensational. I have no way to prove it right or wrong because we haven't had an audit.
The most dangerous gold scenario may be a sudden repricing that destroys confidence faster than policymakers can contain it. Matthew Piepenburg's argument suggests a gradual rise would be more politically manageable, especially if competing nations hold larger undisclosed reserves. The key uncertainty is verification. Reported holdings can differ dramatically from actual strategic stockpiles. For investors, that uncertainty itself can become a source of volatility.